Welcome to Keep It Healthy podcast, where we explore how technology is transforming healthcare. I'm your host, Jan Kamiński, co-founder of Momentum. Today, I'm speaking with Elizabeth Bachman, a strategic communication coach who helps leaders secure the funding they need, the allies they want, and the recognition they deserve. From directing Pavarotti in over 50 operas worldwide to coaching Silicon Valley executives, Elizabeth transforms brilliant minds into compelling presenters. In this episode, we'll explore why being smart isn't enough and how strategic speaking can accelerate your health tech career. Elizabeth, your career journey is absolutely fascinating. I know that you've gone from directing world-class opera performances to coaching executives, coaching founders on how to master influence, how to master communication. What's your background? How did you start from opera?
I grew up listening to opera. I like to think actually that I've been dedicated to the art of great communication since I first walked on stage at the age of 5. And afterwards, I heard my mother say that I was the best darn bunny rabbit ever to grace the stage of the hillside school. And I went, "Ah, they like me." I loved it. So, I was hooked. I thought I was gonna be an actor, and then I realized I was a better director than I was an actor, but worked my way up through the ranks through, started in theater and then wound up directing opera singers, particularly at the Metropolitan Opera in New York and, internationally. And it's because I love theater, I love music, I love languages and travel, and opera has all 4. So that's how I wound up in opera and stayed there for 30 years.
How is it working with opera singers? Are they? I mean, what's the vibe?
It's not that different. Well, they're people, they're human beings. So you've got young opera singers who are just starting out, and then I do a lot of work around how do you present yourself? How do you show up? How do you deal with stage fright? How do you deal with nerves? And I never got to, I didn't have to worry about how do you physically produce the voice. But a lot of it is also how do you express yourself? And how do you express yourself in another language? So, one of the things that I do is I work with people who have to do business presentations in English when it's their second or third languages. And I had to do that when I ran an opera company, founded an opera company in Austria. It was an Austrian American joint venture, and I had to do fundraising speeches auf Deutsch. So I have been there. I've been the person who had to do a speech and get a good result when it wasn't their first language.
Was there a defining moment when you just realized, okay, business leaders, founders need this just as much as singers and artists?
It started out because I was running an opera company and I learned to give speeches to inspire action rather than just to entertain. I had spoken to entertain before, I mean, since I was 5 years old. And when I started an opera company in the US, you have to have a nonprofit organization and you are funded entirely by donations. So I had to raise $100,000 just to start it, just to begin. And to do that, I had to give speeches. So that's where I learned the art of speaking to get people to open their wallets. And actually, when I first started out, I was terrified because asking for money for something that was my dream, that was my idea, was terrifying. And frankly, I was pretty bad. Started out, I was not good at all. And what saved me was someone who was a presentation skills trainer who liked music, came to one of the house parties I was presenting, and called me up the next day and said, "I don't think you made very much money last night. There are some things you could do that could get you better results." And she taught me. What I realized then was I had to get help. I couldn't do it all myself. And even though I was a very experienced presenter, when you're asking for something important, that's when the nerves get in the way, and that's when you tend to make mistakes, or you forget what you're gonna say, or any of the things that can derail a speaker. And I thought I have there the what was wonderful was to discover that there were tools I could use. I didn't know. I had no idea that there's a whole art to speaking in public that I could learn. And I didn't know, I knew that my opera company was going to help people. The reason for my opera company was to give opportunities to young singers and to give international opportunities to young singers. So when I thought about hiring this particular presentation skills trainer, I didn't really have the money. I couldn't afford it. She was expensive. But I thought my dedication to the people who need me had to be bigger than my fear. And so I scrounged around and borrowed the money and scraped it together and hired her, and it was the best thing I had ever done.
Hmm.
And that's where I learned the art of speaking to get results. And nowadays, what I realize is that when you're singing an audition in the opera, or you're singing an aria, or you're performing, you want a result from your listeners. So the audience, for the opera singers, they want to make the audience cry, or they want to make the audience laugh, which is actually much harder. Comedy is much harder than tragedy. And they have the same doubts and the same worries that anybody would have. In business, you want to either convince somebody to fund your company, or you want to sell a product, or you want to sell an idea. And that's most of what I'm doing now is I'm working with people who are presenting within their organization and they aren't being taken seriously. And it's because of the way they're speaking.
Mhm.
And those rules are universal between from the opera to business. It's really the same issues with different vocabulary.
Did you get funded the $100,000?
I did, but I had to do it over the course of 2 years and mostly in $100 increments. So I did a lot of speaking. I did a lot of speaking. And then I had to raise $50,000. We ran for 11 years, and I had to raise $50,000 every year to continue. So that first 100,000 got us started, but then I had to do more every year. So I had to learn how.
Obviously, health tech founders that listen to us, they pitch to investors, as you mentioned, all the time. They pitch to regulators, they pitch to partners, clients, etc. Right? You had a founder in front of you before the big pitch. What would be the one piece of advice that you see that these founders don't do it, and you would give it to them?
There are so many factors. But the first thing is, why does it matter to your audience? Why should they care? I call it strategic empathy, where you put yourself in the shoes of your listeners and say, what matters to them? What do they care about? And basically, they don't really want to know the how. They want to know the why. So if you're talking to your partners, it's why should they be part of this? If you're talking to potential customers, why should they buy this? Why you instead of somebody else? For investors, it's often, well, let's see. Well, I lived and worked in Silicon Valley for years. So many of them, they just want to, what's going to how can I turn this around and sell it? What's going to make me the most money fast? That's one kind of pitch. If it's people who are going to invest and then be with you for a while, that's a different kind of pitch. What do they need? What are the long-term advantages? So that's one thing I would say. The other thing that I see over and over again is people get nervous. And one of the best things that I learned when I was nervous and needed to raise that $100,000 was to memorize your opening and memorize your closing, especially your ask, if you're going to ask for something. Memorize that because those are the 2 times you're gonna be the most nervous. Starting out and then when it comes to asking for money. You have to make it about your listeners and memorize the story because muscle memory can carry you through even if your mind has gone totally blank. The other piece is about stage fright, for instance, is stage fright is all in our heads. If we're nervous, then what's happening, the voices in our head, certainly the voices in my head say, uh, "Oh, they're gonna think you're stupid. I'm gonna look like a fool. They're not gonna care. They're gonna think all this, they're gonna think, they're gonna think, they're gonna think." Whereas actually, they want you to be wonderful. No investor sits through a pitch fest and just to sit there and, eat bad snacks. They're there because they're looking for the thing that's gonna be wonderful. They want you to be amazing. And having sat through many a judging session, most of the time it's not, but realize that they want you to be wonderful. That's why they're there. So how can you make it about them? Get out of your head and make it about them.
You mentioned the stage fright, like with opera singers, but also with founders pitching, also with some, even if they meet with clients. Like, what are some tricks that that on how to deal with the stage fright, or rather presentation fright? Like when you're stressed so much, what can you?
Yeah.
Are there any
Nerves.
frameworks?
Just call it nerves. First of all, practice. That's second of all, practice. First of all, know who you're talking to and what do they care about. My favorite technique for dealing with stage fright is something that I call the dinner party. And listeners, if you look through my newsletters, we're recording this in April of 2025. So find a newsletter called Proven Techniques to Battle Stage Fright. It has a big picture of a dinner party on it. And then you can catch up with the written version of this. Imagine that these are people, these are your favorite people coming to your place, your house for dinner. And so imagine how happy they are to be there and the fact that you're going to serve them a delicious meal. So you want to extend your energy and bring them into your party. Think about it as welcome to my party. Because the thing is, if you're a founder pitching something that you believe in, or if you're working in a company and you're pitching an idea, hopefully you believe in it. So if you believe in it, it's going to be a benefit to them. That way, what you're pitching, whether it's an idea or a product or an app, whatever, is actually a gift to them. It's going to serve them. So think about how are they going to benefit? And then it's as if you're serving them a fabulous dinner, which is a gift. Then when you're asking for the money or the sale or the commitment to your idea, that's dessert. That's like, close your eyes for a minute. Imagine yourself walking over to the dinner table with a fabulous cake that you have baked or purchased, some delicious dessert. And the look in their eyes when they say, "Wow, this is going to be amazing." That's the attitude you want to have. If you find yourself thinking, "Oh dear, what do they think of me?" You're by definition not connecting because you're in your own head. Get back to them. Make it about them. This is a gift. This happened with a client of mine several years ago. she was working for a small nonprofit organization that was helping children who had didn't have many resources. And she had the opportunity to talk to a partner at one of the big law firms in downtown San Francisco who was looking for something to invest in. And so we met outside the building, and together she said, "This is my party. This is my building, and I am bringing them a gift." And because the gift was going to be how wonderful they were going to be to help all these young children, right? So it was a gift. And then we went into the building. "This is my lobby. This is my party." And in the elevator, "This is my elevator." We got up to the 35th floor, and she said, "This is my floor." And I couldn't go with her into the office, but I said, "Before you walk in, just pause and think, this is my party. I'm bringing them a gift." And she
Oh,
walked out with a commitment for $25,000. And for that little nonprofit, that was about a third of their annual revenue. So it works because she was bringing them the gift of knowing that they were going to do a
so
service.
so yeah, a power of story that you tell to yourself. And I know you talk a lot about storytelling as well in business and
Mhm.
in leadership. And you said in your podcast that I listened, like you said before, that storytelling is just a soft skill. It's a survival skill, I believe. Why is that? Yeah, why is storytelling so critical for that? For presentation, for business, for leadership. How do you define it?
Storytelling is our best tool to get visibility and to be remembered and to show your value, because human beings remember stories more than we remember facts. So even if you're talking to technical people, you still are talking to people who we grew up listening to stories. We learn about the world from the stories that our parents tell us. And for that matter, nowadays, we are surrounded by stories. Every ad you see, every TV ad, every billboard, anything is telling a story. It's not saying, what's in the Coca-Cola. It's saying drink the Coca-Cola and you'll be happy. And so drive this car and you'll be happy. Doesn't talk about what kind of wheels are in it or what's in the engine. It's what's the experience, what's it going to feel like?
Yeah,
So if you're ever worried, think about that next time you're watching TV. Just pay attention to the ads and what is the story that they're telling.
yeah.
So
Mhm.
what I find is this is particularly useful for tech founders is give give people the technical information concisely, be short, and then add a story about why it works. So, for instance, I just gave you a technical exercise about imagining that this is your party and you're giving a gift. And then I told you the story about how it worked for my client, Sally. You want both. You want to put them together to both. You can't do all stories. You can't do all tech.
Mhm.
It should fit together. I like to think of stories as like raisins in a muffin or nuts in a chocolate bar. You have the muffin is the food, but then the story gives it that little extra something that we remember, and that's what people remember. People remember stories more than they remember facts
Mm.
and statistics.
You work with a lot of founders. So when they're trying to tell the story, what's the biggest mistake they make?
Go on too long. You really want to do a good story. You're going to work with someone who's good at stories. Practice it out loud. That's another big one, because so often what I see is I'll see somebody do a demonstration on a video call, for instance, and they put up a slide and then they read all the details, and people get bored. What you want to do is make it clear, make it simple, make it concise. If somebody wants the technical details, hopefully you have a printout that you can give them the technical details or tell them where they can go to read all the technical stuff. But what they want to hear is the story. And written language and spoken language are different. So make sure you've said it out loud. For instance, I have a short presentation that I give called Avoiding the Expert Trap: 3 5-minute fixes to engage your audience. And it's a quick and dirty lesson that I usually tell to groups that I'm part of, where if you have no time to fix your presentation, here are 3 very quick fixes. But I first wrote it as 3 hacks. And then I realized when I spoke it that hacks is a word it's hard to understand. If I put the F in fixes, it's a word that makes sense if you're just listening. So if somebody's listening to this while they're driving, then they'll know, oh, I talk about how to fix it instead of how to hack it.
Mm.
And I learned that from teaching diction to opera singers.
What other storytelling techniques you can share?
Oh, there's hundreds and hundreds of them. So I do a whole class on storytelling. One of the things that people don't realize if you work in a company, if you work in an organization, is that you can tell stories about yourself to remind people what you do. This is particularly useful if, say, you're in a large corporation and, say you work for Google or something like that. Your manager doesn't necessarily know all the things that you do. So tell a story from time to time about some success you've had or why this matters to me. I call it seeding your value, dropping seeds by just having 60-second, 90-second stories that you can just drop in, like the raisins in the muffin or the nuts in the chocolate bar, that you can drop in from time to time to remind people what you're good at.
You said something about how, on how people are heard, in a sense, how they can present themselves. I understand this is also about how they can work with the voice or pronunciation during the speech or presentation. And are there any hacks there as well? I mean, what should they pay attention to?
Yes. Yeah. So I talk about the melody of your message. And mostly it's tempo and timing. So you want to make sure it also depends on what language you're speaking. So I know I've had Polish clients who speak English in a monotone and who do not use the kind of melody that English has a lot of melody. And it sounds like it makes a difference if you're speaking to the English. Whereas someone who was born in India has a very distinctive melody. So some of that is you want to speak slowly enough so that people can hear you and understand you. That's another thing about stage fright is we tend to speed up when we're nervous. So if you're speaking in an international situation, and most organizations are international these days. Most people
Right.
have teams from multiple languages and multiple time zones. Slow down enough. Think about how it would sound. And frankly, work with a presentation skills trainer like me, who is also good at languages, who can listen for something and say, ah, wait, there's probably a better word that you could use. Uh, just going back to basic diction, consonants and pausing. Uh, I have a wonderful friend who was a guest on my podcast who's Puerto Rican. And I had to stop her and slow down. I used to work in Puerto Rico, and they call the way they speak Spanish in Puerto Rico is machine gun Spanish because it goes so fast. And when they go so fast, they also leave out the consonants. It's really hard for Spanish speakers, many of them, to slow down enough so that someone for whom Spanish is not their first language, like me, can understand. You have to practice slowing down and stop at the end of a sentence. Stop at the end of a section. If you're giving a speech that has, say, 3 talking points you want to talk to, remember that you know what comes next, but they don't. So when you're about to introduce a new idea, pause for a minute to let them assimilate the last idea and then start a new one. And a good way to think about that is if your speech was a magazine article, where would you have a paragraph? Where would you have a subheading? Where would you have pauses? Punctuation is there for a reason. The
Mm.
periods and the commas and the paragraph breaks, those are there for a reason. Pay attention to them. I like to say honor the punctuation. It's there to help us understand.
So slow down, pause. But for those of us, that has, for example, only 10 minutes a day to improve their communication skills, presentation skills, and they don't have a train. I mean, they don't have a coach. Like, what should they focus on? How can they prepare themselves?
There's an easy, short thing to do to practice, especially if you are speaking in a language that's not your language and you have an accent, is to read an email aloud every day. Go through an email and read it out loud to practice pronouncing. I also, since English is the language I don't have to think about, I help people who have to present in English. When I have to present in German, I get help from a native German speaker who can correct my pronunciation. And they know it's not my first language. So I get a little pass for having the American accent. But I also know, where is the pause? What's the important word? I get somebody who doesn't have to think about to help that with you. So one of the things you can do to improve your own accent or your own speaking is to read an email out loud and listen to yourself. If you're going to do a speech, absolutely practice it out loud because you'll hear when you say something, you think, oh, that made sense when I wrote it, but it doesn't make sense when I say it. It's like
Mm.
fixes instead of hacks. I I didn't realize it till I said that one out loud, and I went, "Oh, oops, change that for next time."
Should you record it?
It's a good idea to record it. It's a good idea to say it into the mirror and to record record yourself. And here's the other thing is that when you do just do one piece of it if you have time. This is where this is where you want to invest the time if you're doing a keynote speech or you're doing a pitch when something has major consequences. That's when you want to take the time to memorize it, record yourself, and then realize that whenever you watch yourself in a recording, you have to watch it at least 3 times before you can get past the voices in your head. They're going to say, oh my gosh, is that what I look like? And, oh, gee, my hair is really funny there. Do I really have that many wrinkles? Things like that. It takes 2 or 3 times. Just watch it through and just know that the chatter in your mind is going to be going for the first at least 2 times. And just give yourself that gift of watching it enough times so that then you can be accurate.
Yeah,
And I'll have to say that I'm on video all the time. I still hate watching myself. I have to force myself to do it, and I do it in 10-minute segments.
and I know you've seen a lot of speakers, but what's the, let's say, most common speaking habit that leaders, or especially, for example, founders, should just stop doing immediately?
I think I've said most of them. It's make it about your audience. And, and the reason you slow down is because you've got to give them time to take in the information. You know it, but they don't. So put yourself in the shoes of your listeners and recognize where they might need to understand something. Now, here's another thing is if you are in, say, in an office, in a team where you're a minority, you're either the only woman or you're someone from a different culture, you might not be listened to. And that is a large part of what I work with is how to be heard if you're ignored, if you're talked over or interrupted. One of the things that you can do is find your allies and, speak up early, especially for women. Be clear, be concise.
What do you
Think
mean by
about what you're going to say.
you mentioned speak up early? What do you
So
mean
in
by
a
that?
meeting, for instance, don't be polite and wait for your turn because you'll never get your turn. You've got the loud people who are going to go out there and just talk all the time. But also make an effort. If you're leading the meeting, make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. If you're in a meeting and you're not getting a chance to speak, the leader of the meeting should, ask them to say, make sure that Jose doesn't speak over me all the time, or that Gustav isn't always interrupting me, and finish what you have to say. Here's where it really helps to have allies,
Mm,
because if that's a consistent pattern, it happens a lot. And with anything, if you're the minority, you notice it, but the people in the majority do not. People don't notice problem if it doesn't happen to them most of the time. So women notice when men talk over them. Most of the time, men don't notice that they're doing it because it's a habit. We're trained as kids. Boys are trained to keep speaking and often to interrupt, depends on how they learn from their parents. Girls are trained to be quiet, be polite, let the other person speak, which is fine when you're a kid, but it's not good if you're supposed to be the director of operations in a software firm and the others keep interrupting you. There's a whole dance around this, and I speak about this a lot on my podcast, which is called Speakers Who Get Results. And so if you're a woman listening to me who is being talked over, reach out to me. I can tell you where to go. It's also on LinkedIn a lot about how women can be heard, because that's the main thing. That's the main work that I do, is helping
mhm.
women, including female founders, how to be heard, how to speak up, and how to make an impression.
Do you also work with communication or rather, you advise or you coach on communication in negotiations, or is it different than just presenting?
The same basic principles apply. What do they want? What do you want? And the classic description of a negotiation is that everybody should be a little bit unhappy. You know, you out you
Yeah.
want to know, you also want to know what are the things to be ready to walk away. What's the thing that's going to break the deal? So don't give away your power early. You should negotiate from a place of strength. Practice it. Practice it with somebody else so that you can deal with the nerves. And then cling to what your worth is and ask for the money. That's one that took me a long time to learn, and I confess that I worked for less than I was worth for many, many years because I was afraid to ask for too much.
But are there any techniques in that communication? I mean, within the negotiations, like I don't know, some voice, like how you should sound, voice, behave, or like.
It depends on the situation, and it's actually a much more complicated question than we have time to go into here.
Right.
So, I just make it about them. Why should they care? What's important? Tell a short, concise story. Have several stories. practice for what you think they might ask. And if they don't ask it, it's okay. If they do ask, be ready. And also, it's okay if they ask you something that you don't have an answer for. That's also a
Mhm.
lot of people are afraid of question and answer sessions if they're on a panel or whatever. It's okay if you don't have the answer. Then you could say, "I don't have that information at my fingertips, but can I get back to you?" That's another thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And Elizabeth, I mean, I know you talk a lot about it also in your podcast, but where can our audience find you? You mentioned LinkedIn, but where else?
Best place to find me is LinkedIn, and it's Elizabeth Bachman, Elizabeth with a Z, and Bachman, Bachman, one N. And I have a website, elizabethbachman.com.
Great. I mean, Elizabeth, thank you for joining us today and for sharing all the knowledge.
Thank you so much, Jan. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to Keep It Healthy, where we explore how technology is transforming healthcare. If you're building in HealthTech, visit our website to download our MVP development playbook. The link is in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe for more conversations with the people shaping the futures of care. I'm Jan Kamiński. See you next time.